Traditionally, television news was, and still is, presented by a polished anchor, usually in a suit, sitting behind a desk, a little actually like me right now. Today, it's usually someone in a room, could even be the kitchen or the bedroom, dressed pretty casually, recording on their phone, breaking down geopolitics using memes, humor, and trending music. We're officially in the era of the newsfluencer, where journalism meets social media and credibility competes with clicks. I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream.
Breaking news!
This is everything that happened on the news today, but it's going to be simplified in 60 seconds.
Guys, take a look at this right now.
The girls are now officially fighting, with Trump now attacking Musk.
Everyone needs to know what's happening in India right now.
Investors who believed in the NVIDIA promise sold a ton of their stock.
America, you have no idea what you are dealing with.
So our Prime Minister invited India's Prime Minister, Modi, to attend the G7 summit.
It's like the modern-day version of the 5 o'clock news, but instead of your TV, it's your phone.
Traditional news is going to have to adapt, or else.
Now, social media has become the main source for news for many around the world. Veteran news correspondents have often been reluctant to break from their traditional storytelling, many now having to adapt and find new ways to report online. But it's not just journalists who are doing this. More and more content creators are producing news content and shaping how millions of people understand the world around them. So what does that mean for the future of journalism and for the way we consume and trust information? Well, joining us today to unpack all of this are Sophia Smith Galer, digital journalist and author. She joins us from London. Writer and comedian Gina L Divittorio, she's in New York City. And Yayu Feng, an assistant professor in emerging media at the University of St. Thomas, and she joins us from Changsha in China. Professor Yayu, if I can start with you. The way news is consumed today, it's shorter, it's snazzier, it's bite-sized. How would you describe how, let's say, the average under 35-year-old is consuming news today?
I guess that covers a lot of my students. I think most of their times are spent on social media. They're not actively seeking out traditional media outlets anymore. And so it's not surprising at all that they're mostly consuming their news on through social media feeds, through influencers. And for a lot of them, news might be just a byproduct of something they've come across when they're scrolling through their feed. And also, I feel like students today more likely to spend time on fragmented news than actually spend some time reading longer form investigative reports. And so those type of bite-sized conversations or interpretations of news fits perfectly with the habits of today's young people.
Yeah, it seems that the attention span also is getting less and less. Gina, you use this kind of style. Break it down for me, the reason why you chose how you present news on your social media.
Yeah, when I started presenting news online, it was the middle of the pandemic. And one of my working theories was that there was a lot of audience exhaustion happening with how headlines were presented. We were seeing kind of constant three-fire alarms. And so the satirical approach I took thought was a little bit more fitting for how people were feeling at the time. When we talk about the attention economy, another avenue of that is how we're able to both breach people's attention, but also what has unsatiated attention. So when we've got COVID and emergencies and extremists blaring constantly, sometimes even an understated approach can be more accessible to people and hold their attention a little bit longer and give them even just a slice of the news that they might be shunning.
Sophia, this is a huge rise. And I mean, everybody, I suppose, can create a social media account, right? But it's not everybody who holds the audience, who can go viral. What are the criteria, would you say, that is really holding an audience, that's creating, there's so many people trying to make a mark on their social media. What is the factor for success these days?
I do think there are several factors, but those of us who are journalists amplifying our work online, as well as news creators more widely, It's often a case of gaming algorithms. It's trying to predict what may be amplified on a platform like TikTok or Instagram, which obviously demands this vertical video format, just as you demonstrated earlier, but also demands quite focused scripting and specific techniques that you deploy in order to encourage a viewer to keep watching throughout the entire video. Video retention rates have been important since social media began, back when I was a very young journalist making videos. In the pre-vertical age, video retention was important. Now it's even more important. These videos need to begin with very succinct and compelling hooks. And then beyond that, it's actually about the strategy of the individual creator. It's not always about what's in the video. It may be wider and what it is exactly that they're planning on offering in the social media ecosystem that's distinctive.
It's a whole new set of rules, a whole new language, isn't it, these days when it comes to reporting online? But not all journalists set out to be on-camera personalities. Many entered the field for the reporting and writing, not really the spotlight. So is this shift towards building a personal brand can be a bit difficult for many in the industry? Journalist Shaun Chakunbi shares her perspective with us.
When you try to navigate this new realm, especially with me, at least this is what I'm personally experiencing, of gaining respect and trust and coming across as authentic with a social media type of audience, or an audience that's used to the clickbait. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like in terms of the way that it's approached, clickbait, or something that continuously keeps you scrolling and engaged in that kind of format. I worry that it requires me bringing more of my own voice into the story and bringing my own personal sensibilities, or I guess thoughts and opinions, right, into the story. But that could be a double-edged sword, because if I'm now trying to look to partner with a legacy news network or write a freelance article at some point, or do some kind of partnership with a more established institution, does that make me now disqualified to work with them? And so the more you continue to signal to us that that is what you are looking for and that's what you're recruiting, the more we're going to try to emulate that, but sometimes jeopardizing the reputation that we've already established for so long as journalists before this new wave of, what do you call it, news influencing.
Yayu, I see you nodding. I want to ask you, a lot of people have become disillusioned with the traditional mainstream media, whether that's right or wrong. Do you think that the trend to these sort of news influencers online is a byproduct of that? And do you think that's a good or a bad thing?
Well, I just think that what the journalist just described was so true, that journalists are now struggling to renegotiate their identities, facing this trend of social media influencers getting into the news reporting kind of style. They are trained to be objective. They're trained to be accurate, to give others fair and unbiased reporting. But on social media, what creates engagement is usually what gives you a more authentic feel, gives you more some personal branding, and those two things are really struggling a lot of journalists. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily good or bad, but we are seeing that if journalists are not trying to adapt and finding a way to strategize themselves, then a lot of spaces are going to be taken over by news influencers. And it's time for, I think it will be an interesting discussion for journalists to have, to discuss what kind of practices or norms that they are willing to adapt, they're willing to see and giving to try to meet where the audience are today.
Sophia, I want to put that to you. Are facts important these days? Because it is about clickbait. People want to go viral. They want to get more and more followers, because followers these days, I suppose, means credibility, even though that doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. So how would you describe, when it comes to accuracy, when it comes to newsfluencers?
Absolutely. I've got 2 points to make. There are lots and lots of journalists now who have successfully saturated this space, including myself. I reach nearly 900,000 people online. My video content has been seen over 180 million times. And I won awards in this space for combining the merits of content creation with journalism when I was a BBC and Vice news reporter, where I very much had the principles of impartiality, and editorial independence were a part of my day-to-day and present in every single video I was making. So we must not assume that we cannot maintain those principles when trying to make viral video. We absolutely can. It's what I, as an innovator, have been building. I've been building an app that will be out very soon that will enable more and more journalists and experts to do this. But we can absolutely and should do. I believe we have a duty to be bringing more factual but very engaging and high quality content to platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where we know there's misinformation problems, where we know these platforms and users on there need to be held to account. And we can do it by making compelling vertical video. We've been making compelling radio and television and news articles for a very long time.
But that isn't really always the case, though, is it, Sophie? Like, we are seeing a trend of people trying to sensationalize. I mean, for example, you also had, I want to put this to Gina, actually, politicians are catching on to this to get their message across, being invited to the White House, being invited by NATO. You yourself were invited to the Democratic National Convention. We had the incident of President Donald Trump inviting the narrative of influences that he wanted to get out. So how would you describe this? Is this new newsfluencer trend a new PR? And they can also be used as advertising, can't they?
Yeah, and that's one of the big double-edged swords is while newsfluencers, more digital-focused news can bring more access, I think they're also much easier to take advantage of because they don't have the training that traditional journalists do. And that comes to fact checking as well as, not taking these politicians that were so kind to let you into their office just at their word. And like a big thing with digital media is that it's not happening in a vacuum. While we're seeing this rise in digital social media news, we're also seeing a decentralization in traditional news, and especially in local news, which is particularly unfortunate as a very trusted form. And so not only is there less of this fact check, more traditional news source, but there's more of what you might think of, what might have been thought of, 5-10 years ago as commentary, entertainment. Those lines have been blurred, and there's a lot of very well-meaning creators out there, but there's also a lot of people that may not be taking this as seriously or may not just have those tools to not become a tool of political parties, bills, lobbyists. You get emails from everybody.
Okay, ladies, if you can just stand by, I want to bring in a special guest, our senior Al Jazeera correspondent, Charles Stratford. He is joining us from Kyiv. Charlie, you have been listening to this conversation. I've pulled up, I was checking out your social media, obviously, for this discussion. Your TikTok, I couldn't find you. This is your Instagram, 0 posts. You are very much like I am, old school TV storytelling. Tell me, why are you not getting on board of the social media train, or have you tried? Like, how would you describe your feelings toward it?
Hi, Steph. Well, I was very much more involved up until, I suppose, about a year and a half ago. And frankly, the reason why I came off, or I reduced, if you like, my social media presence and the accounts that I had in various different platforms was because it just became all too much. As a journalist, it's so easy to become so distracted by so much of this content that is generated from, should we say, less professional, non-media trained people who are posting this stuff. And of course, there are huge issues with respect to, as we've heard the guests talking about, the danger of misinformation, the danger of opinions over objectivity and fact-checking. Huge benefits in terms of, for example, the speed and the reach with which this material can be used. But my general feeling, just in terms of, coming off social media to the extent that I have, was just trying to maintain a degree of sanity in a very complicated world and a very challenging profession as well, where there are so many competing narratives anyway. So it's given me a greater peace of mind, if you like.
Okay, that's a very good point. I want to play this clip, Charlie. I want you to have a look at it, because this is AI, pretty much, videos of influencers during an end of the world segment. Bit dramatic, but bear with us. And I want to ask, is this the direction that we're moving toward?
A detonation has just occurred on the outer ring of the city. We'll now be going live to our top influencer opinions.
OMG, people, the world is ending. Are you seeing this? This is actually so exciting.
Yo, I know it's chaos, but you got real survivor's wife energy.
That's cool. I like them feisty.
Guys, this collapse is literally the perfect dip. I'm buying more right now.
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible this is all just a simulation glitching out, but what do I know?
What is your reaction to that, Charlie? I mean, is that where we're going?
It doesn't really impact the kind of work that we do. For example, sitting here in Kyiv covering the Ukraine-Russian war. Because we're dealing with facts, we're dealing with statements that are made by respective governments, and dealing by the stuff that we see firsthand and hear firsthand. I get the irony of it, but in terms of sort of influencing my opinion, the only thing it really does is influence my blood pressure. It irks, to be honest with you, because as we've heard some of the guests mention. This just encroaches upon our work and makes our work more difficult.
That's a very good point. But just briefly, how do you feel? You're talking there. You're on the ground. You're risking your life. You do some phenomenal frontline reporting, and you on your social media, you're not that present, but you don't have a following. I speak to Gen Z and they tell me they don't know who any of us correspondents at Al Jazeera are because they don't watch television. And yet you have people that potentially haven't left a room in their reporting and they have millions of followers. How does that make you feel? And do you think that's fair?
I completely value that as a platform for a journalist, if it means that you are getting obviously the exposure that one would predict, and the figures that you just mentioned don't surprise me at all. But I have limited my social media use because, as I say, it became such a distraction to the work that we needed to do. And I've also been, over the years, very disappointed by a lot of the stuff that friends and even colleagues, not necessarily at Al Jazeera, have posted, because I just say, in terms of our profession, a lot of the time it doesn't help us in any way, on the contrary. But that's not to say that I'm not jealous, hugely jealous of the amount of followers that many of these very successful social media and influencers have.
Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time, joining us from Ukraine, and what is a very important perspective. Of course, journalism is changing. I saw all three of you actually laugh, Yayu, you in particular, about his blood pressure going up when it came to looking at that clip we played. What would you describe, how would you describe the shift we are seeing in journalism today?
In the industry and also in the field where we study journalism, people have been starting to realize that audience engagement have changed a lot of how journalists are doing things. But also we're paying slightly more attention to the idea of media literacy. Like the video you just played, I think it's pretty well made. It will take some level of media literacy for a average person who's just scrolling social media to instantly tell that that's not real. And for people to realize how much work journalists put into a report, how it obviously takes money and time for you to send Charlie, is it?
Yes, Charlie.
Charlie to report from Kyiv. And people today, after seeing so many news influencers, they do not realize that. And so I think the right now what we need to do, on the one hand, journalists are learning how to adapt to this new trend, but also we need to take some time maybe to educate the audience, educate the public about the differences and educate them to distinguish information themselves so that they can consume responsible journalists online, like Sophie, or they can tell opinions from facts, or they can even do some source checking or even fact checking. And so I think it's really an effort that both the news industry and the audience should all partake in order for our information environment to improve.
Gina, you have hundreds of thousands of followers. What is, how do you get their attention? You've crafted a persona. You do accurate news reporting on your platforms, but you've created, how would you describe it? Is the persona you've created and the way you deliver the news a way to catch your audience?
When I began this channel, it was heavily influenced by the Culpa Report, which was a kind of a caricature of an older conservative news show. And for a long time, there was never any trouble with John Oliver, Weekend Update, The Daily Show, these news entertainment shows, because we knew that they weren't journalists. We knew that this leaned on the side of entertainment, and now that's gone, and something I've actually noticed, and something that made me take a small step back from my channel, was when I would make some of these satirical bits, they weren't understood that way. And I, at one point, accidentally became a source of fake news by accident. Something that I thought was enough of a joke to be identified wasn't. And so it's the character that I created to be this caricature, I've had to reevaluate, which is something I think potentially not enough creators are realizing, that they're not identified as creators, and that when you report a news story, they immediately assume you're a journalist, which is dangerous.
I'm sorry to jump in there. I just want to get one more question to Sophia. That distinction between journalist and influencer is so important, isn't it? Sophia, you made the jump from journalist to still a journalist, but you've just changed your storytelling way. What is your message to myself, traditional, foreign correspondents? We're working for TV. We might, post stuff on social media, but that isn't where the viewers are, is it? They're online. And do you think traditional news is changing, and will it change for good?
I think as journalists, we are in the best position to be making more content online, because what do we usually come with? What do we normally bring to the table? Journalism ethics. These are, as you've just been discussing, media literacy is something that we don't get nearly enough education about at school, but at least holding ourselves to account as journalists, which is what we do every day, may empower us compared to other professions. When we do come online, we do start storytelling, and it is a challenge. Whenever I'm training or trying to help other colleagues do a similar jump to me, the main obstacles are time and training, because it takes quite a lot of time to make a video. Even though you're filming on your phone in your bedroom or your office, it can be quite time consuming.
Yes, and certainly it does seem to be shifting very much to online. Sophia, Gina and Yayu, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you all for tuning in. If you have a comment about our show, talk to us on social media. This is also your show, and we're always open to your suggestions. Use the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we will look into it. Thanks for being part of the conversation, and I'll see you soon.